Well, hey there, and welcome to episode number 2 of Groove, the No Treble podcast. You can always find us at www.notreble.com. My name is Mitch Joel. It's Thursday, February the 5th, 2015. Let's get on with the show. So, who are you and what do you do?
I'm Jerry Jemmott, and I play the bass.
Man, do you ever? And not only do you play bass, Jerry, you've been playing bass a long time.
Well, yes, longevity is a good thing.
They call you Fingers. They call you the Groove Master. Take me a bit back. When did you first see the bass? I mean, this was before I think we all thought bass was cool.
That is true. You know, you hit the nail on the head right there. When I heard bass, it wasn't as amplified as it is now. So naturally, the first thing you heard was not the bass. You had to go through layers of music sometimes, depending upon the style of music. Naturally, but the music of choice that got me into playing music was jazz, and the raw recordings. You didn't hear the bass that well. But one particular note, when I did hear the bass was Paul Chambers playing, and I shouldn't say that I didn't hear the bass before, but his bass playing affected me to the point where I wanted to play the bass. When I heard him play "If I Was a Bell," "If I Were a Bell" with the Miles Davis quintet, and that changed my life basically.
But when you say you heard it, did you hear it on vinyl, on radio, or live?
I heard it on the radio.
Okay. And
Mort Figo, it was either Mort Figo or Symphony Sid back in, this would be 1956.
Yeah, so that's the thing. I mean, I don't know how I don't know when legends like you want to say how old you are, but it's that sort of date where we have to frame ourselves. Like, was there an electric bass? Was what then?
Well, they were around. Little Fender made his first bass, and they have hit the 52, 53, 54.
Right.
So it was there, but the style of music that I was listening to was that they caught my ear. Of course, I heard everything they recorded on the radio before that. If they had an electric bass, I heard it. I might not have known what it was, but it didn't grab me anything. I didn't gravitate to it. And in fact, the first time I heard an electric bass after playing upright bass for many years, I couldn't stand the sound of it when I heard it played live. And I swore I'd never play one.
Now, wait a second. I want to know who was playing it that made you thought you would never play one.
Whoa.
Was it the sound or the player?
He wasn't a great player, and the sound he had was terrible. So that turned me off. It was like a bad experience, like having a great dish prepared improperly the first time, and forever you don't want to have that dish. So it's kind of one of those kind of things. But once I started hearing other people playing it, and I decided I was going to go in that direction, I decided I was going to make it sound good to my ears. Basically, it took a while. I didn't like the sound of it at first when I played it, but I knew I had to play it if I wanted to move ahead in music at that point. So I had to eventually find a sound that I was comfortable with, that I could, sink my teeth into and have something to stand on.
So how old were you when you started playing bass?
I was 11 when I started playing bass.
Upright?
Yeah.
And electric?
I started electric playing when I was 19.
So you get this electric bass. You've had experience playing upright, but I mean, you were still pretty much a kid, and then sort of heading into your teens, which is, I think, when you really sort of know if you have a proclivity for the instrument skill set. You pick up the electric bass. What are you thinking in the first times that you're playing it? Is it a question of getting your head around the instrument, or are you already in your brain conjuring up creative ways to make this bass have a voice of its own through you?
Well, you have to go back before that. What got me to the point to make that change and the experiences I had. So when I made the change, it wasn't that big of a change. I started playing when I was 11, but I started working professionally when I was 12. and I would work from 3 to 4 nights a week with a band of men who were like in there. The youngest was 30, the oldest was probably 60.
You didn't look at the child labor laws at the time, right?
Oh, they had something called the what do they call it, the cabaret laws back then.
Right, right.
And so we had to be a certain age. So I had falsified some documents to get a cabaret card to showing I was 4 years older when that time came. I must have been you can get one at 18, so at 14 I had my cabaret card. So I've been working for a while, and I had gotten a taste of recording music prior to me playing the electric bass, and I had quite a extensive credits to my name, as a kid, working with established musicians. So I was credible in the fact that I was already had recognition that I could play. So it wasn't matter. It was a matter of me just transferring my passion to make music better onto the electric bass. If that makes any sense to you.
It does. And so when you say you were already building up your credentials, whereabouts in the time frames of the Atlantic Records world was it? Is that right in the middle of it? Like, were you that young doing Atlantic Records?
No, I was working locally with local musicians, building up my credits. People like Pusho and the Latin Soul Brothers, well-known New York band, Willie Bobo. I worked with the Mercer Ellington Orchestra. I was in a group called the Mixed Birds that was founded by a producing A&R man named Alfie Wade, who got young kids from all over the city to come and play together, kind of like the Newport Youth Band, from which Eddie Gomez comes out of, Ani Masala, Larry Rosen, Micah Benny, Nat Pavone, Harry Hall. These were all like young child stars coming up when I came up, had an opportunity to play. So I came up in a very fruitful time. A very rich time where people were sharing music and learning music. We had played in bands that would only rehearse. We would never work. We just go and sight read music every night, every Monday or Tuesday, in different locations, just to play, with no thought of a job in mind.
So when you say that you started playing bass when you were 12, at that point, were you already sight reading? Like, were you doing music before that, and it was just bass at 12? Like, you were playing music when you were much younger, I guess.
Oh, I was learning. I had to learn.
Okay.
I had 1 year of instruction, and I learned how to read at that particular point. And then I would play in the junior high school orchestra, which I had to read more. And then I was working these local jobs at the same time. I didn't have to read at all. So it's like a combination of the two. And I eventually went into the All City High School Orchestra, where my demanding of reading was greater. So it just, my experiences kind of like molded me and prepared me for the studio.
Which happened when?
Basically, I started making records at 12. I mean, with the junior high school orchestra.
Like everyone else.
We were recording then. We had with the All Bronx High School Orchestra, we'd have a recording every year. And then the All City High School Orchestra. And then Alfie Wade's Mixed Birds, we would record. So I was familiar with the process and what it would take, how the character of the performance changes once the recording light comes on. So it wasn't that much of a stretch for me to move into the big leagues, doing demo recordings for people, and then eventually getting a major record date. Like my first date with Nina Simone, that was my first major record date. So I was prepared for it. I was really fortunate to have been well prepared.
You were you'd spent enough time from a young child, basically, in the foxholes. I mean, live music. So
while going to junior high school, going to high school.
So, but when
I was working 3-4 nights a week.
When you talk about that red light, though, talk a bit about that. I want you to unpack that a little bit. Did the red light change who you were as a player, or because of the time you had spent preparing, was it just like, this is what it is?
Well, it's the seasoning of everything that you ever knew or thought you knew or wanted to know, and putting it into that one moment. Once the red light came on, this is it. Either you can do it or you can't do it. You're going to go for it or you're going to stand back, depending upon what it is. And you have to pick your spots. Sometimes you can reach out and go for it. And sometimes you have to be cool and let others, pick up the slack, because you're hearing music all the time, and it's about really, how much of this music should you be playing, and how much should the other instruments be playing? So you have to filter out, what you don't want to play and what you want to play.
Right. And so you have this trajectory that just keeps on going. I mean, it keeps on clicking. And, whether it's time, whether it's happenstance, whether it's a bit of a crazy amount of hard work and good time, there's still sort of like a universe that's working in tandem with Jerry and the bass here, where it winds up being that you do what is essentially, I think, regarded by any music fan, a seminal component of music history, the Atlantic Records. You wind up playing on music from people like Aretha Franklin and Ray Charles and B.B. King and Herbie Hancock. I mean, the career goes on. But when you're in the middle of the Atlantic Records part, and I want you to talk a little bit about that, and you're playing, do you know what's happening? Like, do you know how, or is this one of those things where only in the future can you look back and go, wow, like I actually was a part of something so seminal? Because you didn't just affect music that people listen to. What we know now in 2014, moving to 2015, is that a lot of our favorite musicians over time, some of them have already even passed, were influenced by that period. I mean, it's a pretty astounding thing.
Yeah, it truly is. There's a lot of layers to that question. The environment, the spirit of the time is one thing. You cannot leave out, the role of the artist in society and him being able to portray what's going on in society artistically. So all that was going on in terms of people, artists speaking out, producers speaking out, and me as a young musician, once I started, making records, making music, and on myself on my own, either by way of let me say, I first thought my first fascination for recording came out with I had my own tape recorder, and I would record. I found myself recording a lot of stuff, and I really recorded, and sometimes I wouldn't even listen to it, but I loved recording it. And then when I started playing, I realized that I was making history. Once
So
I
you knew
recorded
that
something.
then, when you were, or you're saying in general? Okay.
No, I knew then I was making history. 'Cause
Really?
when you're making a record, it's for that purpose.
Right.
And that's why when that red light comes on, it becomes so much more meaningful that you're capturing something. This is going to be it. This is going to be the definitive version of what it is you're doing. There's going to be no other version better than this. That's the mindset that you go in, or it's going to serve the purpose like no other purpose was made with that music before. So that's the mindset you go into making recording. And if you don't have that mindset, in my terms, in my thinking, of why bother?
So
if you're not going to make history, why just do it for your own pleasure? That's cool. But if you have an opportunity to make history and to change people's minds and to give them something they would never hear any other way, you go for it.
So you talk about going for it, Jerry. I mean, we're talking about the original bass line on the original recording of Mr. Bojangles. I mean, you could sort of retire after that, no?
I don't know. You don't get much credit. You don't get much credit for bass line. At least back then you didn't.
Right.
Look what happened with Jameson. My gosh. I mean, he had to go die before people found out who he was.
Right.
Outside the musicians, and that's you can't make your bread and butter from musicians. You have to come from from society, from people.
Right. And then the artistic pursuit is what I meant. I mean, you hang your hat up knowing that this seminal. I mean, even I think about being a young kid and my dad playing me B.B. King, and of course it was The Thrill Is Gone. And I'm like, that's you, Jerry. You did that. That's like a pretty. I mean, it is an amazing thing to think about in terms of also where the bass instrument was, because you've said it many times where it really was this thing that was sort of in the background. It was this instrument that helped bring together other types of instruments. It was, not often seen as a center point. I guess in jazz trio, obviously we had, bass solos on stand-up and stuff like that. But primarily, as you went into the recording scene, it really was that. Mm-hmm. When did you, as a bass player, start realizing in your career, and listen, you've been at it longer than most, that, wow, it is actually starting to become more predominant. It is starting to become more of an instrument unto itself.
When did I?
When did you feel that started happening, where the bass actually was being more respected? It was sort of coming into its own. It was being recognized as
Well,
or are we
I
still fighting that battle today?
it's happening. I was, when I picked up the electric bass, it was the idea that I thought it could do more.
Mm,
So I was pushing the envelope, for that, as you described, to do just that, to give it a more dominant role in the music. That's just the way I heard it. That it had the power to do more of that than more so than the upright bass would have. And I recognized an opportunity, especially with dance music, which is my forte. I believe is that it was a more powerful way to express myself for people dancing. So that was one of the main reasons why I even bothered to switch, just to have a good time, basically, with people who enjoyed the music more, and with musicians who enjoy performing for people, as opposed to just playing to get their nuts off, basically. Which a lot of young jazz guys would do. And when I had frequently played with some young jazz guys, as opposed to older, seasoned working musicians who I worked with, when I played with the young jazz guys just for fun, they all seemed to want to just play for themselves. And they would get a couple of jobs here and there, and they were very disrespectful to the audience. And I didn't like that, so that was one of the motivating factors to move towards that was the factor to get me from upright to electric bass.
and
So that same idea of making the bass more than what it was, or give it a more dominant role, that was in the back of my mind all the time,
right.
to give people another perspective on the bass. Or I used to say to myself, show them how to play. And I only said it once, but apparently it did work, because through the beauty of recording, people actually learn from listening.
Right.
More so than I learned from listening. I didn't have the greatest chops, so the greatest ear for music. So it was a struggle for me to hear what everybody else is playing. So I had no choice but to make up my own stuff.
And Matt, and isn't that, I mean, core to that artist life, that creative life, where you don't just look at it and go, I'm just reading sheet music and punching a clock, but this thing that I'm holding can do a lot more. I mean, it's inspirational to hear you say that, Jerry, because there were a lot of musicians back then who were just following orders, as I like to say.
Yeah, sure, it happens.
But where was that from? Was that always in you from a young kid, or did it really only come to you when you started respecting what the instrument was and it could do?
Well, my mother would always say there's more than one way to skin a cat. So, in terms of listening and making music, there's always another way of getting something done.
Mm-hmm.
You can do it one way, you can do it the same way, you can do a contra rhythm, a contra melody, a contra ascending against descending. There's always another way to bring something to the fore, basically. And it's not so much as doing it not for the purpose of just for the sake of another way, but another way to making that gem shine, as opposed to just one standard way. You have to find different, try different ways to make that gem and that stone and that ring is going to shine, having the proper setting for it. And so you have to find that proper setting. And in recording process, you have to find that proper setting pretty quickly. You only have 3 hours to do 4 songs, and some of them might not be written out. So you have to find that proper setting, rather quickly.
When was the first time you heard the name Jaco Pastorius?
When this is real close to me, because I just moved in with a friend of mine, Jimmy Smith, who's my road mate when I was with King Curtis back in the '67, and Jimmy Tyrell, who was one of the forefathers of the studio scene before I came in, he had moved up the ladder to become vice president of CBS Records. And we always stayed in contact. In fact, my first recording session that I ever did as an arranger, I hired him to play the bass. I didn't play the bass. I hired him.
I want to get back to that story, Jerry, because that sounds like money stupidly spent.
I was working for J.J. Jackson. I had done some of his recordings. He said, I want you to, arrange my next session. So it didn't make a big hit. But anyway, I've known Jimmy since coming in and him leaving out and blah, blah, and moving up. We stayed in contact. And he sent me Jaco's album. And this blew my mind. I'll never forget that's when I first heard the name Jaco Pastorius. This was 1974.
So 1970.
1975.
So it's
1975.
it's the album we all know, we all love. If you're listening to this podcast, you have the album. That's what I say.
Sure, you sure do.
You know, so that's the first time you hear his name. When's the first time you hear from him?
From him, I heard from him in the Cosmos when he declared that he was nothing but a poor imitation of me.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's the first time I heard from him.
That's not, Jerry, this isn't you bragging. This is a truthdom now. Now we're in the real truth. There's a lot of times you interview me just into, the fish was this big type of story.
Yeah, right.
But this is a very seminal part of the conversation, and I think part of the trajectory that's led to you having that really has sort of led to your legacy base as well as this Cosmos moment.
True, it's very true, because I had no other contact with him other than him listening to me on records. I'm reading this article in Guitar World. Well, somebody pointed it out to me. Somebody gave it to me and showed me. Say, see what they say here, blah, blah, blah. And then this is like a 79 possibly. And then I'm traveling, doing Ain't Misbehaving on the road, playing upright bass on a period show where I had dreadlocks down my back, but I had to wear a wig. Anyway, I meet a musician in Amsterdam who knew Jaco personally, and we talked and blah, blah. And he said he's going to have Jaco, give him my information. And about a year or so later, I get a call from Jaco. And at that point, we started, we hooked up. We started teaching together. And I was in the middle of writing a book at that time. And a lot of my concepts that I had gotten together, he clarified them for me. And just watching his work ethic, just blew my mind. So he's become a big part of my the whole process. In fact, that chapter 1 is really devoted to what I learned from what it took to become the greatest. You have those elements and components had to be in place. That was derived from me working with him those 3 years. So I didn't see him until like 83, 84, actually, when we actually had face-to-face contact. And for the next 3 years, we worked together until we got the video done.
The Cosmos are a strange thing if you think about this story, because what you're saying is essentially you are busy doing these Atlantic record sessions decades earlier. This is the stuff that very much drove him to think differently about melody composition, and I guess what he could do with this amazing instrument that it clearly was created for him, basically. And then you fast forward, and suddenly there's this strange, you get his solo album, you respect him, you hear that he said, it is a very strange mixture of relationship. And I'm saying the story like this because it's easy to hear this story and go, yeah, but there was no internet. There wasn't mobile phones. It wasn't like, people say, oh, I'm giving you my information. It's not like I can instantly text you. Like, it did take years to actually connect to people back then.
Right, that's true. Mitch, you're right there. We kind of take it for granted now, but yes, it was like the covered wagon did take a while to cross the country.
Right. Totally. So when you meet Jaco, and for those who know the story, and everyone knows the story, by that period, he wasn't actually doing so great, right? He was struggling at that point.
At that point, he was struggling to make something out of his life that had been just recently, shattered, as I found, and doing the movie, recently being part of the, post-production and being a consultant to family and Robert Trujillo on the movie. I've seen a lot more than I didn't know back before. I was just involved with it. But what do you think of the things that preceded us meeting? The time frame of when things happened, him coming to New York, it's just truly amazing that he wanted to get this done. He wanted to get this done. He knew his life was ebbing away for whatever reasons. He told Bobby Thomas that he was going to pass by he was 34, a few years prior to that. And so, when you have a sense of that, you want to do something. You want to set the record straight. He wanted to put something down, and that was his desire. When he came to New York, he wanted to work with me and get the first thing he wanted to do was make a video.
So yeah, I mean, there's two components now that are coming out of this story that are so important. One is, and we're going to talk about this movie, Jaco, this documentary that the Pastorius family, along with Robert Trujillo from Metallica, have really pushed towards the market. And obviously, people, without your help, this movie definitely wouldn't have happened. But before we get to the movie, I want to talk a little bit about what you call this video. It ain't just this video. I mean, it is the Bible, I think, for anybody who wants to play the thing that has 4 strings, or 5 or 6 now. But modern electric bass. I mean, this is 1986 when it's finally released, and it wasn't just an instructional video. It was very much a conversation. And I mean, for me, I got to tell you a personal story, but aside is it changed my life because I didn't even realize that you could teach like that. For me, up until that point, instructional videos were the guy sitting in front of a camera slowly, and then like he riffs really fast, and you're like, I can't do that. But you really sat down and talked a lot more than just about what scales he was playing or what rhythms he was playing. You talked about what the bass meant, and I felt, at least, as a young player then, that it really set the stage for almost like showing the instrument more respect. Did you realize going into that it was about more than you two guys talking about Jaco, that it was actually an exploration of what this instrument is?
Well, as I said before, my mother always told me there was more way than one way to skin a cat.
Right.
So I've always looked at being creative in terms of expressing an idea a different way. I was in the process of writing my own book at the time, so we kind of got in the way of it. And so everything that I had been working on, I kind of like used what I was going into my book, my thought and philosophy about the approach to learning. I used that in terms of telling his story, basically. To come to basically that's what happened. It was very simple routine for me to sit down the night before and write out 20 questions based upon this whole idea of bringing something more to the fore than just the 4 strings.
Did you guys discuss, like, talk a bit, like what led to modern electric bass? Like, whose idea was it was it you? Because you weren't just the host of that. I mean, we all know that you had a hand in the production. I mean, you had to very much, and I don't know, I'm asking you, but it's my understanding from reading stories and biographies that you very much had to sometimes drag him into the studio or drag it out of him. It was a process.
There are so many convoluted stories on that. In fact,
so tell the story, Jerry.
Rob Wallace, he saw him. I hadn't seen Rob in years, and we got into something about blah blah. And I said, no, that didn't happen like that. And now I got to finish telling Rob exactly what I did the night before, preparing for the Jaco interview. It was nothing like what Rob had talked about, putting us up in a hotel someplace to make sure that we would get there on time. Some malarkey, I don't know.
Right.
I don't know where these things. He says he's been telling people this for years. And once you start telling a story or saying something or get an idea, after a while, you yourself believe it and forget this is not what happened.
Right. So what happened?
Okay, he's got himself believing that this is what happened, but that's not what happened, because I knew what I was doing the night before the Jaco session, the morning of. So it wasn't anything that he had thought. But to answer, what was your question, by the way?
I want to know. Listen, who has a question? We're having a conversation. We're missing his coffee or something stronger. You tell me what is the true story? Where did the idea come from? Because it is something unique. No one had done that before.
It came from 3 years of basically trying to get this done with 3 different production companies. One of which wanted to sequester him away someplace before the shooting. That was like news that was known, and he escaped basically, and we didn't do the session that year. That was the date was not secure at any rate. It was like it might be this day, it might be this day, and some way in the process he left wherever they had put him up. He left town. He didn't want to be bothered with it. So that took a year. Then we found another company. I think we ended up with DCI, and took about a year or so to get it straight with them, to get the actually get it done. And once we got a date, a firm date, it was just a matter of showing up in the studio, basically.
One day? How long? How many days did it
Oh
take
yeah, one day.
we shot that all in
Well,
one day?
we started. The date was supposed to start at 9 o'clock. We got there at 8:30. Me and Jaco were there at 8:30. The crew shows up at 9. They had, the usual studio production, technical stuff that goes on, setting up. We didn't get set up till 10:30. We didn't start playing till 10:30. I think the thing was scheduled to go to 5. We finished that. We walked out of there at 3:30, basically. We started an hour and a half late and finished an hour and a half early than expected.
What did Jaco say when it was done?
Oh, it was great. We were whipped. We couldn't say nothing. We left it on the floor. we could. We were worn out after that. I mean, it was a total, exercise and getting it done. At one point, we took a break. We're getting a little tired. We had to re-up, get our energy up, and come back in for a part 2, so to speak. But everything went smoothly. I mean, from question 1 down to question 20, I just ran down the list.
When was the last time you watched that video?
That studio, in fact, I did recorded a couple of movies in the same studio since then. I do the music for HBO and some of their real sex movies, which fits right into my program. So,
this is the Uncensored podcast.
I've been to that studio a few times since then when I lived in New York.
When was the last time you watched the video, though, the Modern Electric Bass video?
Well, I've seen parts of it and watching parts of it. I haven't watched the whole thing through. I can't remember when. I probably didn't do it until maybe years. Well, after I wrote the book that's based upon it. I'm not sure I wrote it then. I went through it then. But I didn't really watch it too much after that. I haven't watched it in recent years. But when I do, it's always fascinating. I always learn something else. Always see something.
Yeah, me too.
Like everybody else, I imagine, does when they look at a movie. No different. But it's featured prominently in the movie. In fact, not as prominently as it used to be. It was a lot of it in the movie originally, but now it's less, which I'm glad to see that. And it's just done, more judiciously. And it's the movie's a work of art. I mean, to produce the director, Paul Marchand, he did such a great job of putting the pieces together and telling the story. It's just, it's amazing, truly amazing.
Where were you when you heard that he passed?
I was in New York. It was 1987. I knew where I was, where I was living. I wasn't doing that well myself, and it was like I was really pissed off because part of the negotiation of getting the deal done after it was done, after we had done the work, we started negotiating. We weren't the best businessmen. We didn't have this going in. So after we had done the work and I wrote a book and presented them with the idea that they could sell the book with the cassette and the VHS as a package or without the book, blah, blah, blah. We got all these things done and it came down to when we were going to get paid. They wanted to pay us once a year. We fought back and forth. I wanted to be paid quarterly, which is how I get paid from BMI. I'm doing all the BB King stuff. I get royalties from. I knew how the royalty program worked, and I wanted to be paid quarterly. They wanted to be paid to pay us yearly, and I told them that one of us could die waiting for a check. And I said, if this is cold, this is manufactured like I'm telling you now, and so we finally agreed down to twice a year. Well, don't you know, Jaco, that would have been twice. Quarterly is March, June, December. March, June, September, December. That's quarterly. We ended up going with March and December. Those 2 months. Okay, that was twice a year. We settled on that. Don't you know Jaco died on September 21st, waiting for a check? Had he been paid quarterly, he would have had the money and he wouldn't have been where he was possibly because he had been trying to get money that whole month before that and they wouldn't, so they wouldn't send him anything. So when I heard he died and when he died, you know, it just hit me like a ton of bricks. It's like, I told you so. I told you so. So I was pretty distraught when it happened.
When you say "I told you so," are you saying that in relation to the royalty checks, or are you saying that in the response to knowing how he was?
Well, how he was and relationship with the royalty checks, how he would need the money. I said, one of us could die waiting for a check if you want to keep on paying us once a year. He got down to twice a year, and the quarterly payments would have had him been paid. He would have been paid in September. And he would have known the check was coming in September.
Right.
Just knowing it coming, it makes a difference. You can depend upon it coming.
So now, fast forward a little bit, and you're now out of when you first heard in your first emotions. Now you got to reflect on the fact that it's a young man who had unlimited talent, and I think everybody would agree exceptional skill. And it's a life, I think we would all agree, squandered to a certain degree in terms of what could have been. I mean, you never know what you never know. Does your thinking, as you get older, as you start seeing your career, as you start reflecting, do you think about the impact of what we don't know at all? Or is it just like bad timing, it is what it is?
Well, you said one thing about the squandering. He didn't squander. He was a workaholic.
He left it out there, yeah, for sure. He left it on the table. I mean, in terms of it's so there could have been so much more art.
Oh, of course. I mean, he had to fight with the fight he had to go through. If you see the movie, if you see what he had to go through, you'd be amazed. You would be amazed the resistance he had from people around him, from Joe Zawinul in particular. Once he started stretching out, and Peter Erskine explains it pretty well, in the movie, and other people explain it. It was like two cobras fighting, in the box. This comparison. He had to go. He had a lot of opposition. And he didn't get much comfort from the people he was hoping to get it from. And that took him off the deep end. It's the depression.
Right, but that's what I'm getting at. Is it the mental illness, and obviously mental illness and issues like that are always augmented with issues of drugs, alcohol, whatever was going on. Yeah, when you say that, is the two cobras in a box really the music talking, or is it the addiction or illness talking? Right? I guess we'll never know.
No, this is the observation of people. But this is when there was no problems going on, when everything was just peachy creamy.
Okay.
Everything was fine.
Right.
Was fine. But this whole attitude, when he was trying to make a statement on his own, he got a lot of opposition. As long as he was with the band with Web Report, he was fine doing their stuff. But he stepped away from there and started doing his own stuff with Word of Mouth and the Trio of Doom. That's when things started getting, bad. From that point on. You can look at it's like a time calendar. You can see right on the calendar, and you see the movement, you see the interviews. You can trace it just as clear as a bell how the progression of things start to de-escalate. Basically, spiritual support is very important. Having this love of family, he loved his family. He was a family man. In fact, Herbie Hancock described him as a farmer. He was like a farmer. The way his routine. He was so family orientated and work structured. He was incredible. I mean, Johnny was quoting from his journal the other night at the showing, how he in his journal get up at 4:30, do this. Everything was in a book. Every day was plotted and marked out. Where this man was constantly working.
Crazy
Incredible.
Thing. And so, talk a little bit about when you get approached for this movie, Jaco. When you get approached for it, what was your thinking? What did you want to contribute to it?
It's funny how when I got approached, I said sure. When I met Robert Trujillo through a mutual friend who said that they were working on the movie and they might want to talk to me since I just moved to L.A. In fact, Robert thought I was dead. A lot of people,
But he meant that in a loving way, right?
It's a statement I'd heard before from a lot of people. And I come to, I don't have a problem with it. I know what kind of life I've lived. and
It's a
the
challenge of the
trepidation.
spotlight, right? It's a challenge of the
Hmm?
spotlight too. It's a challenge of the spotlight too. It's hard to always be in the spotlight for that long, and it's easy
Well,
to be forgotten
yeah, that's
sometimes.
true. That's part of it too. At the same time, being in the spotlight, and then the life I was leading. At one point, I had a very long, a serious bout with drugs in a 15-year span, and I didn't want to be seen. I didn't want to be found. So
Yeah.
it was like when I could understand people saying, "I thought you did." I'm cool with that. What's next? What have I done for you lately? Well, check my stuff out. Check out my book. Check out my CD. This is what I'm doing now.
Right.
Leave it at that. I have no problem with it. So when he said that, we laughed. I said, "You're going to be hearing that a lot, Robert. Trust me." So now it's a joke between us every time it happens. He says, "Jerry, guess what? I found another one when he thought you was dead." So it's all good. It's all good.
So you meet
But
Robert, and Robert talks to you about the project?
Well, he told me what was going on. Basically they had all this 60. They had at that point 65 interviews. They can only use 12, but they thought they might want to. They wanted to hear what I had to say, and that the possibility they might want to interview me. I said, sure, I'll be glad to. Anything I can do to contribute, to the movie, to his legacy, I'm for it. And so that's how we proceeded with that in mind.
Is there a hope for you that when people see this story and remember and then acknowledge that you're not dead and you're very much alive, well, healthy, and doing your thing, that it's almost like the chance for them to see the work you're working on right now? Is that also part of there is an opportunity here?
Yes, it is. There is. There's talk about loving a lot of things for the 30th edition of the movie of the a special product being created around the 30th anniversary of the modern electric bass. So that's kind of like that's in the works. And everybody seems to be pushing forward with agenda to get that done, to tell my story also, which is fine. But I've been working on telling my story on my own for the last all my life, basically. Especially now since I've gotten into, like I said, when I met Jaco, I was in the middle of writing my first book, and I put that on hold to write his book, which turned out to be my first book. And then I started working on. I've been publishing educational materials, video, audio books. I've done that prior to, like in 1980, I was doing that, and I did have my own video. And somewhere before Jaco's video, I had done stuff. So I've always been in this field of education, in a sense, for the longest time.
I definitely wanted to talk to you about it, so it's a perfect segue because you sort of hinted at it with your relationship with Jaco and that sort of mentorship education component. Modern Electric Bass is very much an educational piece of work. And
and by the way, that's definitely his title. That's a title.
You're right.
When he came up, I said, "What do you want to call this, Jaco?" It's like that. He said, "Modern Electric Bass." That was it.
Yeah.
I said, "Solid."
But again, if you think about again the work you did, the Atlantic Record Sessions, your solo work in the 70s, on and on and on. There's this body of work. There's this thing with Jaco, but in all that, your career has also very much been guided by this teacher educator role. And so I want you to help me unpack that a little bit. Where did that come from? And what's that process been like? Because now we do have a legacy of people who've learned so much from you, and not just because they were trying to understand what you were doing on a recorded piece of material, but because you were teaching them.
Interesting. They say sometimes the best teachers are the worst students, and I was a really poor student coming up. I didn't have all the tools necessary that most musicians have, being able to hear well, distinguishing registers, distinguishing notes. It was a challenge for me. And I have to think about it even to this day. I have to really focus on it to check out what am I actually thinking or am I hearing this. And a lot of times I play what I think as opposed to what I'm hearing because it's more absolute. What I'm hearing might be totally something different. That's not what I should be, it's not what I'm thinking or should be played. So along this journey, having been successful as a studio musician, it comes about, the year was 1976, and my good friend Richard Davis, a great renowned bassist. I'm sure you know of him. His work with Sarah Vaughan and Eric Dolphy back in the day, in the studio, being a studio musician, bassist extraordinaire. He once went on WBAI and performed Coleman Hawkins' saxophone solo on "Body and Soul" on the bass Arco live.
Mm.
Okay, that's Richard Davis. And I said, Richard, we have become friends at that point. And I said, I need to learn more. I said, what should I do? He said, teach.
What a great answer, right?
And that was it. I started in 1976.
Amazing. And when you think about the work you recorded, you think about obviously the celebrity factor around this video that everyone knows. Talk a little bit about the satisfaction you get from that, because okay, fine, you were teaching to learn, but after a while, my guess is that the teacher also starts learning a bit and also starts learning about how to teach a bit.
Well, the teacher, the reason he told me that, he was very, I wanted to learn more. He said, yeah, you learn more when you teach, you will learn more. And to this day, I learn more than my students ever learn in the course of a session. To this day. There's something about the process of teaching where you're constantly having to find ways or develop ways to reach the person you're teaching or the people you're teaching. So you have to dig deep and test your knowledge on a particular subject. And sometimes in teaching, you don't know. You have to discover it together. You and the student, well, let's figure this out together. Let's find this out. So ultimately it comes down to, I've come to realize that through my 40 years of teaching, that basically what I do is I instruct people on how to learn, because to learn is the most valuable thing. And in music, you're constantly having to learn something, whether it's from somebody else wants you to play or something that you want to hear, that you have in your head to play. You have to learn what it is and figure out how you want to play it, and then play it several different ways to get the best out of it for the circumstances you're playing it in. So it's a constant situation where you're developing skills for problem solving. It is I think the most important aspect of learning music is the fact that you're undertaking a system of problem solving that will bode you well for the rest of your life, no matter what you do.
Prior to this conversation, a couple of days back, Jerry, you sent me what you said was chapter 1 of your book, Solar Energy, SOULER Energy. And I sent you an email back, and I said, I think you made a mistake. You sent me like a JPEG. It's an image. You said you were sending me chapter 1. And you sent me back a note saying, hey, dummy, that is chapter 1. And with my tail between my legs, I went back and looked at that image, and I've been staring at that image now for many days, actually. So I want to thank you for sending me that image, because I don't think it's just a book to teach people how to play bass. I think what you actually wrote is a chapter, and you've summarized it quite well about how to be successful in one very simple image. Now, it's a simple image, but it's very, very complex. The most interesting part of that image came in 2 words at the bottom of this circle, and the words were physical endurance. Now, the reason why I'm going to ask you about this is because when I was watching Modern Electric Bass, and I watched it again recently, not just because we were having a conversation, but I just happened to want to watch it, and then the serendipity of life is Jerry and I are going to have a conversation. One of the things I made a note of in my little notepad that I keep by me, because I'm always trying to learn too, is you seemed very amazed, I guess, at Jaco's physical endurance, the strength in which he was playing, whether it was the stretching of the left hand or the speed of the right hand. You sort of even stop at one point and you say, like, I want to talk about this physical endurance that you had. And, he sort of flippantly passed it off as, when you're playing 8 sets a night from 12 years on old, like, you just get strong muscles. But I could tell in watching this video that you were going, and it, like, we take for granted, like, it's almost like it's easy to say, well, I work out, so I've got physical strength, but it's not just that. And I want you to talk a little bit about that, because it's weird that it struck me in the conversation I had with Jaco, and I made a note of it, and then I see it showing up on this chart. So it's something that stuck with you for many years as well. What do you mean by physical endurance?
That's the ability to repetitively play a given passage over and over and over again. One thing to play it once, but play it 1,000 times without making a mistake.
It's like impossible.
Well, in the metronome book, which I hold dear, they say if you can play something 8 times, you've got it.
Right.
Okay, in terms of memory. But yeah, that's good on the top. It sounds good. But you want to go beyond that in terms of memory. One thing is memory is one thing. But physical endurance allows you to have that muscle memory and that mindset to be focused, distracted, keeping time, everything in place physically. Let's be able to repetitively play something over and over again. To be able to execute an idea so that it's not even an issue whether you're going to make it or not. It's just you're just going to set out to do it. You're going to get there.
And of course, to the right of physical endurance, you have mental fortitude. And I think what I sort of take from that is the whole you can't fake it. I mean, when you are doing this stuff, it is very I think the word I would use is intentional. There's a lot of intent in what you're trying to do. And I think whenever you hear a great piece of music and it strikes you as a human being, whether it's bass playing or beyond, it is that intent of the artist that you feel. You feel not only the physical, but you feel that mental fortitude as well, right?
Yeah, it's that, and it's these physical endurance and mental fortitude. These things can happen in a flash, and sometimes you build these things up, and when sometimes you have to actually call them and demand that they step to the fore. It's just like simply like saying, "Pay attention now." That's
Right.
mental fortitude. Okay, look out now. Get ready for this. Get ready to attack this patches. Get your mindset. These things have to be able to have access to these elements on an ongoing basis. But if you don't know what they are, then you can't go after them.
Right.
So the reason I wrote them out was so these people would know what they are, identify them, so have a way of reflecting them or fusing themselves with that, so they become that. If you don't know it exists, then it's harder to be of something that you can't physically see, as opposed to something that you can see. So the reason I wrote it out is so that it plants a seed in your brain. Well, this exists. Let me use it.
Yeah, and I'm guessing that you're not just teaching, but you're learning too when you do that.
Of course, always learning. You never stop learning.
Jerry, I can't thank you enough for your time that you've given to this. I can't thank you enough for your contribution to the music world, and for sure, obviously, to the bass community at large. I know everybody feels your rhythm when you're doing the stuff that you do, and even in terms of the Jaco movie and all that. So thank you very much, and I'm happy you're not gone either.
Thank you, Mitch. It's a pleasure to be here.